Mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Greg Ford, and we have a great turnout for this webinar this morning. We have people from all around North America, and I think a couple internationally as well. So welcome. It's a real pleasure to have you on the line today. And the subject of this webinar is going to be how to lead and coach employees based on different personalities. So it's a topic near and dear to my heart. Now, I want to begin just by showing you a question and asking yourself, when you think about things that happen in your workplace, be it conflicts or even trying to motivate and inspire people, does a one-size-fits-all approach work? Well, I think we all know the answer to that is no, and it's because we're all so different. We're all born with different personality settings, and if you have kids or nieces or nephews, I'm sure you'll agree they can be born in the same household and raised in the same environment, and yet still be very different kinds of little people. Here's a stat for you. According to Business Insider, when people are asked to recall a recent conflict with a coworker, 80% of the time that conflict is with the opposite personality trait. So remember that statistic because I'm going to be referring back to it a few times today. It's really important. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to do a brief overview of what is personality, just in case you aren't that sophisticated with the topic. We're going to do a bit of a dive into the different personality dimensions and how we can understand them. But then most of the time will be spent on the actual coaching, leading, managing according to different personality types. And I know that's what you're here today to listen to. So this is me, in case we haven't met or talked on the phone. I have about 25, 28 years of business experience in consulting, including human resources and recruitment, and of course specializing in psychometrics and talent assessment. And I'm also a speaker and author. I've spoken at a number of conferences internationally. If you don't know much about Talent Click, we do focus on employee assessments. We're in more than 40 countries around the world. Some of you may work at these companies you see on screen right now. One of the takeaways from this is we work with big companies, but also small companies. And we work in a number of different industries as well. It could be natural resources, transportation, construction, you name it. Now, here's another interesting statistic. 60 to 70% of Fortune 500 companies are using employee assessments. And many of those companies are using them for hiring, but more and more companies are using them for employee training and development. And that's, again, tying into the focus of this webinar today. Now, what are these companies after? Well, of course, they want to increase positive events, and that could look like just better hires, more efficiency, productivity, increasing team morale, employee satisfaction, and other things as well. It's also about decreasing the negative events, and it could be lesser things like absenteeism, it could be employee turnover, or it could be more important, costly things like theft, fraud, violence, harassment. It could be, if you're involved in the safety, in a safety sensitive environment, it could be injuries, fatalities, property damage, you name it. And these things are all extremely costly. Now, the commonality with all of these things is typically human factors. And that's what we'll talk about today. One of the human factors is personality. There could be other things at play. It could be fatigue. It could be something's happened at home. And they're stressed or really tired or what have you. But again, we'll focus on personality. Now, typically when we're working with organizations, they're using the assessments for the recruiting and hiring. That's the third box down in purple. But as I mentioned, more and more are using them for that box down below, which is training and development. So this is how talent assessment fits into human capital management in general. So let's get on to the next section of what is personality, just in case you want a brief overview. Have a look at this. Now, what's your gut reaction to this? When I show this, sometimes people in an audience go, yeah, this is great. I would love to be doing that. Whereas others envision a hospital visit and getting gored by the bull in uncomfortable places. And there's no right or wrong reaction to this. We all have a different reaction based on our default settings, our natural personality. Same thing with this. You might look at this and think that's absolutely crazy. Other people might think that's cool. I'd like to be this person. So what do you prefer? What do you gravitate to? Do you gravitate to more of those quiet activities on the top where there's more solitude and independence? Or do you look at the ones on the bottom and think, that's me. I would love to be in Times Square right now. Or I love the aggression and excitement of football. And I want to be in that stadium with 60,000 other people. Once again, no right or wrong answer. But when we take these natural default settings and take them to the workplace, it presents all kinds of really interesting opportunities and conflicts. So what is personality? Well, it definitely runs pretty deep. Above the surface, we see the outcomes, we see actions and behaviors. But prior to that, what we can't see are people's natural tendencies and preferences, the natural urges and impulses we have, the knee-jerk reactions. You've heard me use terms like hardwiring and default settings. Personality absolutely drives behavior. Now, we can learn to override personality. We can learn to make different choices with what's called a pattern interrupt, and we'll talk a bit about that later. I want to make it clear, we're not here to change personality. That's very resistant to change, and typically it does not change throughout one's lifetime much. We can become more mellow and just learn to act a certain way, but typically our knee-jerk reactions, our hardwiring and impulses are set. And personality is definitely measurable. So how do we measure it? If you haven't done this before yourself, or you're not using one in your organization, I'll briefly explain. So assessments these days, it's not like the old paper-based ones where you filled in the bubble sheet. They're usually cloud-based on a computer, and they're mobile friendly. Generally, the good ones are available in a number of different languages. They're written at a basic reading level. They have to be non-invasive, and there has to be no adverse impact as well. And generally, they're quite short. Hours are 10 to 15 minutes long. And again, with the magic of technology these days, they can be automated, and software algorithms produce these reports within minutes. And they can be stored in an online portal that one can go to retrieve these reports hours, days, months, even years later, as opposed to always having to print out a PDF report. Now with us, I'll just make it clear, with that 10 to 15 minute survey questionnaire, we actually produce a number of different reports. And here they are. I'm not going to go through each of these. You'll see the one on the top in blue. That's the one I'm going to focus on today. But the one on the left in orange is one we have that measures values and attitude. It measures, does a person have integrity? Do they take responsibility for their actions? Are they coachable? And so on. And then the two on the right, the one in red and the one at the bottom in green, those are more concerned with safety. Most incidents that are involved in safety-sensitive areas are not due to equipment failure or a lack of standard operating procedures. They're due to human error, and the human error is absolutely correlated to behaviors, and behaviors could be impulsiveness, impatience, rule resistance, and so on. But once again, let's focus on this one. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. So here's a close-up of these, and I'm going to go through each of these dimensions very briefly, just so you understand what they're all about, and then that will form the foundation for the actual coaching. One thing I do want to make clear is you can take an individual person's score and plot it on a group scatter plot graph. So each of these little dots or diamonds is an individual person's score. And this is pretty cool because what you can do now is you can see where people are clustering, and you can identify patterns and trends from a high-level business intelligence standpoint. And you can look at the correlation between the personality results and actual outcomes in the workplace. So as an example, with this particular organization, workers who had high impatient scores on the personality assessment had an average incident rate 4 times higher than those with low scores. Workers with high impulsive scores had an incident rate 5 times higher. This kind of application of the data can take place for almost anything. It doesn't have to be safety. It could be theft or fraud or violence. It could be absenteeism. It could be just predicting general job performance. There's so many different things that can be done with this, and we'd love doing research. So if you're interested in partnering with us, talk to us further. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through these briefly. So let's look at the first one, non-dominant versus dominant. So the non-dominant individual, there are some adjectives below. Team players, supportive, they're methodical. The ones on the right, dominant individuals, sometimes can be seen as bossy, outspoken, authoritative, assertive. They take charge. They need to be in charge. They don't like following. Now, what's interesting, remember the 80% stat that I said earlier. 80% of the time, the conflict is due to somebody having the opposite personality trait. So when we look at these, this is how these two sides view one another. And they'll often put the little word too in front of this. The dominant individual is too bossy. He's too outspoken. He's too assertive. Whereas those dominant people are looking at the non-dominant people thinking, they're too compromising. They're not, aggressive enough. And that's where some of that conflict can come into play. Now, again, I don't want to just talk about the negative and about conflict, because some of these personality traits that people have are wonderful, and they make people really good at their jobs. We need dominant people to be in charge. Not everyone can be in charge, so we need people at the other end of the spectrum who are non-dominant as well. But they have to coexist. And often we don't, because we do see the world differently. Let's look at the next one, contented versus achievement orientation. So contented individuals may be seen as satisfied or too unambitious, too settling, too friendly by the achievement-focused people. And those achievement-focused individuals on the right side might be perceived as being too driven, too hardworking, too ambitious. And that can be a real problem sometimes. When everyone understands one another, when they have that self-awareness and awareness of who they're talking to, that's when this smooth magic can happen and everyone gets along. But it takes a good manager and a good leader to help people understand who they're talking to. And some companies do this kind of thing very well in team building sessions, and others don't. We're here to help with that. We provide this objective third-party diagnostic tool, which really helps open up the barriers of communication. Next one down is reactive versus calm. So reactive individuals may appear as too emotional, too anxious, too impulsive, too irrational to all the calm folks. And the calm folks might appear as flat, unemotional. They're too even-tempered. They're too laid back. Does this describe you? Anyone else you work with? This is a big one. Oftentimes, reactive people, they have this sense of urgency that causes them to vibrate at a different level. And they're looking at the calm people thinking, what's wrong with you? You don't care. You don't give a crap about this project or the deadline. And yet the calm people might. It's just they don't show it. They internalize it a bit more. And the calm person's looking at that reactive person thinking, don't freak out. This is going to get done. So hopefully that's an example that resonates with you. You've probably seen that in your organization. Reserved versus outgoing. So this one is about extroversion according to the classic 5-factor model of personality. We just gave it a different label. So reserved individuals, generally a little more introspective, quiet, calm, modest, whereas people on the other side of things, these are the extroverts. These are the spontaneous, talkative, sometimes maybe a little too social, a little too loud individuals. This is another one that really can cause conflict in the workplace, especially if there's team building activities. And by the way, extroverted people outnumber introverted people by about 3 to 1. And therefore, and also because they're a bit more loud and forceful, they're often the ones that are setting the team building exercises and the parties and so on, and often saying, let's go for drinks after work. And those reserved individuals don't want to do those things. It doesn't mean they don't like people. That's a common mistake that people have when they're thinking about introverted people. Introverted people often really do like people. They just don't need big crowds. They get drained by stimuli and being overstimulated. So hopefully that makes sense. The next one, direct versus empathetic. So you probably know people like this, or you might be one yourself. On the left side of things, you're very blunt, you're task focused. Sometimes people would put the word too in front of there. You're too impatient, you're too frank. Whereas the empathetic folks are the nurturers, the carers. They're very sensitive to the needs of others. And that can be wonderful. We need people like that. But sometimes those direct people might think they're too sensitive, they're too emotional, they're too patient. I think you get the point on that one as well. We've got two more to do quickly, and then we're going to get into some practical tips. The spontaneity versus regimented. So regimented people on the right can sometimes be a little rigid. They love details. They love rules. They love following those rules, and they get frustrated by the people on the left who don't follow those rules. They're a little more flexible, a little more laid back. They kind of wing it as they go along. And you probably know people that just love crossing the T's and dotting all the I's, whereas others think, yeah, don't sweat the small stuff, no big deal. Another big source of conflict in the workplace. And another one where we need both. We need those spontaneous, flexible people, especially in organizations that may not be as established, maybe startup organizations in the tech world. They have to roll with the punches, and one week looks different from the next, whereas regimented individuals really do like that structure, and it kind of rocks their world when the rules are always changing. Final one, conventional versus open-minded. So conventional people are cautious, focused, practical, planned, predictable, and they don't like uncertainty. And the open-minded people are often viewed as being quite progressive, bold, creative, outside the box thinkers. Okay? So let's get into coaching different personalities. Now, this is not a little workshop or webinar on coaching. That's a whole art and science in itself, and we could do a whole day-long session about that. And there are professionals out there who do this for a living. They deal with consulting and with coaching, and they do a very good job at it. We give them the diagnostic tools. Now, that said, I am going to very quickly touch on some best practices for coaching, and often what is used is called the SAR model, situation, action, results. And so let's just break that down a bit. When you're describing the situation to someone, be specific and relevant. Express the impact of the situation on you and on others. So example, when you do this, John Doe, others feel like this, and the outcome is blank. And it's important to use objective language, so factual, uninfluenced by feelings, opinions, and assumptions. So you can't just say something like, you're always late. It's important to be factual and specific and say, I noticed you were late for 3 out of the last 4 meetings. Make sense? Then the actions. This is the stop and start a conversation. Specify what you'd like to see changed going forward. And it's important to only make 1 or 2 requests at a time, otherwise they'll get overwhelmed. And make sure the actions are realistic. Also listen to alternatives or compromises. The final one is, it's really important to help people think through the results, the outcomes, the consequences of the behavioral change, and explain how it will benefit everyone. It's really important to sell the benefits to get people engaged in this. Okay, so those are 3 slides that just quickly outline the framework for what we're about to talk about. All right, so scenario A. Let's say you have an employee named Betty who thinks that another employee named Joe is a jerk. Betty thinks he is too blunt and hot-headed. You need them to work together on a project. What do you do? How to handle this? Well, the wrong way to handle it is, as you can probably imagine, to go to Joe and say, you're being too blunt and hot-headed, stop it. I mean, does that work? Of course not. So here's a little trick for you. Why don't you go to their personality assessment report and have a look at where Betty scores. So now you've got this piece of data, and you can contrast Betty's score versus Joe's score. And let's look at the reactive versus calm scale, because this is one of the things in play with what Betty's complaining about. Joe has this sense of urgency. He's always stressed. He needs to let everyone else know it. And Betty just doesn't work that way. She sees the world differently, where everything will work out. She's relatively calm and even-tempered. There's another one at play as well. Betty is highly sensitive to the needs of others, and her feelings can get hurt as well because she's so empathetic. Whereas Joe is very blunt and straightforward. And that works fine when he's communicating to other direct people. It doesn't work quite as well when Joe is communicating to someone like Betty. So, using that script to situation, action, result, here's a little trick for you. You can kind of insert the dialogue in here. And here's something you could say to Joe. Joe, in each of the meetings this month, you've spoken very sharply to others. That's not a problem with people who have a direct communication style like you. But when you do that with the empathetic people at the opposite end of the spectrum, someone like Betty often feels disrespected. As well, she has more of a calm personality. She gets rattled when you react loudly when you're stressed and under pressure. Does that make sense, Joe? What I'd like to see is when you're feeling stressed out, don't let it out around Betty. Count to 10, go for a break, go for lunch, or come talk to me instead. And when you do this, Joe, what's going to happen is Betty will stay more focused. She'll feel more respected. And the outcome of this is the project will go better. It'll be on time and on budget. And that's not only going to cause you less stress, it's going to make you look good too. Sound good, Joe? And it's not enough to talk to one person. What do you do when you're talking to Betty as well? Here's some suggested language. Again, using the SAR approach. Betty, you have not attended the last two meetings. You've indicated it's because you're fed up with Joe. I understand. He has a reactive personality, meaning he can be wound up pretty tight. He also has a direct communication style, so he doesn't mince words. You, on the other hand, you've got this wonderful, calm personality. You're empathetic and sensitive to others. I love that. I know it can be difficult, but when you don't attend meetings, the communication breaks down and the project is at risk. So understand that when Joe talks that way, it's not personal. Watch, and you'll see that he talks with everyone that way. Also, try to focus on the amazing skills he does bring to the project. So when you do this, when you start depersonalizing things and focusing on Joe's skills, the project will run more smoothly. Everyone on the team is going to be happier and more engaged. Also, a great project outcome is going to make all of you look good. And that last little bit of language plays to Betty's sense of empathy, where she wants everyone to get along. She's quite sensitive to the needs of everyone on the team. Okay? So there you go. It can be as simple as that. Just really going back to analyze what that individual person's default settings are. And sometimes it's one dimension, sometimes it's two, sometimes it's three. But if you take the time to sort of map the conflict to the personality dimensions and then map it to the SAR, it can work quite well. So here's one other quick scenario. The team lead, Linda, is frustrated with Mike because he doesn't care about the quality of his work. That's what she thinks. Mike is frustrated with Linda because his work is never good enough. And the morale on Linda's team is down, and she's actually losing people on her team. So what do you do as Linda's boss? Well, going back, you can map how Mike scores versus Linda on a couple of different dimensions. And you'll see the ones to key in on here would be the achievement orientation and also how regimented someone is. So you can see Linda scores very highly on those two. Now let's just make this just a conversation with Linda, just in the interests of time, as opposed to talking with Mike as well. But I think you'll get the idea of how to talk to Mike. So what you can say to Linda, again using the SAR approach, is, Linda, you've given every member of your team, including Mike, an average performance rating or even low rating each quarter for the last 2 years. I think it's great that you have high standards and big goals. I also love that you're really detail focused. Most of the time, those are awesome traits to have. But Linda, sometimes when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And morale is down in your department. We're losing good people, people who were receiving strong ratings before you stepped in. And that employee turnover is costing the company money. So what you need to do is carefully evaluate which priorities are actually priorities for the company, because not everything can be. Then ask yourself if each task must be done perfectly. Some of them should be and others not. And maybe sometimes someone else's way of doing things might be all right. And finally, when you start letting perfect enough be okay for some things, your team will be more engaged and more productive. You'll get better results overall, which will make you look good. Make sense? Hopefully you like that. I'm going to do one more, and the first two were negative. They're dealing with conflict, but it's important to keep in mind that these assessments can be used for employee development, inspiration, encouragement, motivation in a very positive way as well. So this final one flips things around and talks about more of a positive situation. So let's say you're a sales manager or a VP. Jane is your top sales rep. But unless you can motivate her and keep her challenged, you're in danger of losing her. Top sales reps usually leave your organization by the 3-year mark. What do you do? All right, let's look at Jane. Jane on the dominance scale is super high. On the achievement orientation, she's super high as well. And finally, outgoing, she's super high. This is a magic combination when we look at leaders and also sales leaders. The sales is definitely important to be quite outgoing, comfortable with social interaction. So the first two, the dominance and achievement orientation, man, that's a 1-2 punch when we're looking at promoting people into a leadership role. So what to say to Jane? Jane, in the 3 years you've been with us, you've consistently had the best sales numbers. We think you're amazing, and we want you to be proactive. We want to be proactive and keep you challenged and satisfied so you're with us for many more years to come. Let's discuss your career path. When we review the results of your personality assessment, it shows you score extremely high on the dominance scale, on achievement orientation, and also on the outgoing scale. That's a magic combination for leaders, for drivers who have ambitious goals. Do you feel like you're needing a role where you can be more in charge and achieve some pretty incredible things? And of course, Jane is going to say yes, 99% likelihood. So end off with excellent. Let's start making plans to get you into our leadership development program. I think you'll find that the new path will give you more job satisfaction and will help you achieve some big things in future. So there you go. That's a quick trick, like I said, that can be applied to so many situations. And there really are not just dozens, but hundreds of situations. These were just 3 scenarios, but my goodness, we see different odd things pop up every day in the world of managing people. And it's partly because we're all so different, which is a really cool thing that makes the world a more interesting place. Now, it can also, I see it as pretty easy. It can also seem a bit complex and overwhelming. I'm not going to go through this, but this is a quick reference guide. It's like a handout you can take away with you. And you'll see that we kind of break things down for each of the dimensions, and we actually give you tips and tricks. How this person should be communicated with, what they would benefit from, what they would not benefit from. So you see we've broken it down for all of them. There's the 7th dimension that we've added in. So that's our gift to you. And this is available as a handout. So if you go to your GoToMeeting handouts tab, it's right there. Halfway down, you'll see handouts and then WPP quick reference guide. So you can attach it, download it and attach it right there. Or Liz will be sending out a follow-up message. It'll be the recording of this webinar so you can watch again if you like, or share with others who may not have been able to see it today. And also Liz will attach that. The final method is it will be on our website as well under resources, and you can download it from there as well. Okay, so we're almost done, and I just want to summarize things. These are the takeaways. If you remember nothing else, remember this. The personality is definitely a major contributor to fit and job success. That's what this is all about. It's about fit. We can be hardwired differently, which makes us unsuitable for one job, but it might make us a rock star for a different job. Personality is definitely predictable and measurable. And it's important to lead and manage based on different personalities, not that one size fits all. And so what does this mean to you as a leader, as a manager? Well, your team can be more effective. You personally can have fewer headaches and more time for other things. Wouldn't that be nice? And you will definitely have higher job satisfaction. And that's what we're all looking for as well. Finally, you can look like a rock star. Maybe you get promoted. Maybe you get a raise as well. But those are some of the benefits. Those are the takeaways. So So there's my contact information. You're welcome to call us or send an email. We'd be happy to answer any further questions that you might have. Um, you'll see the CPHR logo in the middle. We are doing a certification course with the HR Association. So it's a half-day session where people can come in and learn to be certified on how to use assessments for hiring. We don't have one yet for how to coach and lead people, but that is coming. So as I mentioned, the first course that we have with them is how to use assessments for recruitment, selection, and hiring. Okay. So we've come to the end of the session at the half-hour mark, so good timing. And I just want to quickly look and see if anyone has asked any questions during the chat. I don't see any. So as I said, feel free to email me or give us a phone call. We'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. And aside from that, thank you so much. We really appreciate your interest. And yeah, all the best. Take care.